discussion and talk, we now move on to the next esteemed speaker of the day. As you all are aware, that at India Alliance, we are deeply committed to public engagement of science. And in the last 2 days, many of us has seen discussions incorporating public engagement as part of this work by our India Alliance fellows and grantees. To take this a step further, we have with us our next esteemed speaker of the day, Dr. Shannon Olsson, who combines cutting-edge science with compassionate reasoning. Let me introduce her briefly to you. Dr. Olsson wears many hats. She is a chemical biologist with more than 20 years of experience with holding faculty positions, including at NCBS, National Center for Biological Sciences. She is also a science consultant, a sustainability advisor, and an acclaimed international speaker, nudging everyone towards the goal of sustainable development. Currently, Dr. Shannon is the global director of the ECO Network. She also serves through the ECO Network's international hub as the special scientific envoy to India with the Danish Academy of Technical Sciences in collaboration with Danish Innovation Center, India. We are really glad to have you with us, Dr. Shannon, and the stage is all yours.
That was really, really kind. And also thank you for inviting me here. It's a real honor to be able to speak about sustainability to such a wonderful audience, and also to follow such an amazing speaker. I am such a big fan of Ms. Marai and the work that Sewa is doing. So this is actually an interactive presentation, so you don't have to stare at your phones and look at Facebook and Instagram. You can actually join me and participate in this talk. And this is actually a lot of the ways that I do interact with audiences who have access to smartphones, which many of us do nowadays. So you can scan that QR code, or you can also go to this website, ahaslides.com/IA conclave, and that'll be coming up now. And the reason why you need to do that is because I'm going to start by actually having you have a question, all right? And I'm going to ask all of the audience this question, so I hope that you all can participate. So I'll wait a couple of minutes here and let you join in. You should see this slide when you joined in. And people are joining. Okay, so since we have quite a few people joining, I'm going to start with the first question. It's a hard question, all right? Here's this code even bigger if you want to scan it. I'll give it 10 seconds to scan it. Okay, you ready? Here comes the question. It's a hard question. What is science? In one word, what is science to you? I see lots of things: knowledge, facts, creativity, experiments, investigation, understanding, empowerment, diplomacy, excitement. I agree with that one. Peace. Reality, journey, inquiry, solutions, nature, testing. Fantastic. Science does mean different things to different people. And this is what it means to all of you out there. So there's just a few seconds left. I'll let the word cloud generate itself. existence, devotion. Okay. You ready? I'm going to go to the next question, all right? So knowledge is the biggest word there. So several people put knowledge, but there's all sorts of other words there. It's a job, it's a journey, it's observation, it's care, lots of different things that you put. Okay, so now that we know what is science to all of us, now I want to ask you, why do we need science? And I mean science broadly. I don't mean I mean medical science, social science, technological sciences, mathematical science, mathematics as well, all the STEM, MM. So now we have a lot of diversity here in the answers. Better living, progress, understanding, improving knowledge, life, growth, a better life, well-being, advancement, optimize our existence. That's a very evolutionary answer. Survival. Understanding ourselves, understanding the universe. So here we have a lot more diversity, right? Because we actually need science for many things. But yeah, progress, knowledge, we see both of those things coming out in both of those answers. And science is important. That's why we're all here today. That's why we're all in this room. That's why we do what we do. It's not easy, especially in India. It can be very hard to be a scientist. There's lots of challenges, as I've learned too, being here for almost 10 years. But it's a very important thing to do. And now I'm going to take you through a little bit of aspects of science in the past, right? So many years ago, of course, this was one of the views of our globe, right? The idea of the flat earth that I'm sure you're all familiar with, right? And for many years, this was thought to be the case, that we would just fall off the edge of the earth. But however, for thousands of years, actually, at this point, even in the ancient times, they knew that the earth was round. And more evidence came forward as we gained more and more knowledge of how to observe our planet, and clearly we were not going to fall off the edge of the earth, and that the earth was in fact round. And this is one of my favorite examples from my high school biology textbook, is the homunculus, right? The concept that the human being was entirely contained in the male sperm, and that it was just simply implanted in the woman and then grew as a full-formed human contained inside that little sperm. And it wasn't until actually the late 1800s that really the first microscopic fertilization experiments showed that actually both the egg and the sperm are needed. It was actually took that long for this idea to really be fully dispelled, despite the fact that it seems clearly impossible to have a tiny human inside a sperm. And this idea, the humorism theories that actually we had different humors throughout our bodies, and that was what was leading us to diseases. And it wasn't until the knowledge of germ theory that was really started to dispel this idea that we didn't just get sick because of bad humors around our different parts of our body. And lastly, this one. This is the concept of phrenology, right? That the idea is that the shape of your head dictates not only your intelligence, but your personality, your prospects for life, your ability for wealth, and it also became obviously a really wonderful way to promote racism as well, as you can see from this particular image. So, and phrenology was not really also debunked until the 1800s, when we started to understand the brain, we started to understand genetics and the basis for human development a little bit better, and human neuroscience. So what do all of these concepts have in common? Well, one is that they've all been debunked. That's one of them, right? I don't, except for this weird movement of flat earthers coming out on the internet, most of us don't think the earth is flat, right? And most of us don't think that there's tiny people inside of sperm, right? So those have been debunked. But the other thing is that they were actually accepted scientific concepts for many years, and sometimes decades or centuries. And it took actually repeated knowledge and testing and experimentation to dispel this knowledge. And that's important to remember, because it's important to remember that science is not an absolute truth. It's a process. It changes over time. And the things that we know today may change tomorrow with new knowledge. And it may involve complete changes in paradigms of how we think about the world, right? Whether the world is flat or round, whether we need a woman's egg in order to create the next generation. These are massive changes in our thinking, and they are necessary, and they are part of the scientific process. Now I want you to go back to join this, and this is the last one for the day. I'll let you off the hook after this. Name an important scientific discovery, maybe your favorite one. The wheel, yes, that's a very important one. X-rays, penicillin, antibiotics, the internet, gravitation, vaccines, the law of gravity, DNA, evolution, fire, antibiotics, airplanes, discovery, agriculture, electricity, the cloud, so lots of them. AI, we'll hear about that more this afternoon. Yeah, so there's lots and lots of discoveries. And lots of these ideas, and lots of these led to some pretty major changes in our thinking. And in many cases, they solved really big problems that we had in the world. Like the discovery of penicillin, the first ability to fight infections, and electricity and agriculture, and how that helped us to live our lives easier. And this is important, that all of these discoveries actually helped us to solve problems and to change our way of thinking. But now I want to take you to this week, to the start of this conclave. So these discoveries all brought new knowledge, and in many cases helped us solve problems. But these are some headlines from just the start of this conclave, okay? So I'm just going to read them out to you in case it's hard to read. One says, the UN goal for ending hunger by 2030 risks failure as global food crisis worsens. Another one is, the Indian culinary must-have is off the menu as prices jump 400%. I had tomatoes this morning. I don't know how they got them. Global temperatures were the hottest on record for 3 days in a row in July, and as we know, that record keeps getting broken every day since. Floods, heat, and smoke, the weather will never be normal again. So what does this have in common? Well, the fact of the matter is these are not one problem. These are many problems. These are actually a confluence of many, many, many different things that affect, biodiversity loss, climate change, food insecurity, inequality. All of these things come together into what is known as the global polycrisis. So this is a very fancy term that's being used by lots of people right now, but it is a useful term because it really encapsulates the fact that these issues that we're trying to deal with today are not one issue. They're actually many, many issues that all affect each other. As you see right now, there's environmental, social, financial, and technological issues we're dealing with at the same time, and they all are interlinked. They're not in isolation, right? Food insecurity is directly affected by environmental factors, right? And education inequity also affects financial issues, and they all actually compound each other to cause what's called a polycrisis, which means that you can't just solve it with a single discovery of penicillin, right? It's a much, much bigger systemic issue, and that is the problem that we're trying to deal with. And that is a problem because we actually have two problems. The first is our society has a lot of trouble addressing systemic issues, number one. And the second is that we scientists are also not trained to address them. So those are the two issues I want to discuss today, and I'll take them one by one. So to explain the first one about society, I'm going to start with my cat. Okay, this is my cat. He's very pretty. His name is Mumriken. My husband's Swedish, so it's a cartoon character. And once in a while, in the middle of the night, as cats often do, he will just freak out and he'll run through the house and he'll invariably knock over a vase or something like this and break something. And then I don't find it till the next morning, okay? And I can't punish him because he did this several hours ago, so he has no ability to connect those two things together. And this is the same problem that we have in society with these issues, right? If it was so easy that you drank out of that plastic Bisleri bottle and suddenly a forest fire started over here, you'd probably stop using that plastic. But it doesn't work like that. These problems aren't immediate, and they aren't directly connected to you in most cases, which makes it really hard for us to adopt sustainable thinking and sustainable actions in our daily lives as a society, because we simply are not directly connected to a lot of these problems. It's a collective response of many, 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 many things all put together. So the second thing is about us as scientists. So this is a screenshot of the India Alliance website. Here's all the amazing different fields that they fund, many, many different fields. And I imagine many of you are actually members of these different fields of science as well. We have so many different disciplines. This is just biology. This is actually just biomedical sciences for the most part. Now, if we add in chemistry and physics and other branches of biology and engineering and mathematics, it becomes astonishing how many different types of disciplines and fields that we have. And we are taught and we are trained, as I was as a PhD student, to specialize, to focus on particular aspects of understanding our universe, and specialize more and specialize more. That is the opposite of what systemic understanding gives us, right? Because we are very specialized, and it's very hard for us from our training then to be able to think about these very large problems because we simply are not trained to do it. Now here's the other problem. So this is not the problem. This is just a screenshot, so I'll tell you about the problem. This is me a couple of weeks ago. You might recognize the man to my left. That's Vijayaraghavan, K. Vijayaraghavan. He was the former PSA. He and I were in Denmark, where I hold a position as well. We were talking about the importance of scientific advisement for policy making. And in that room, we were actually at the Danish Academy of Sciences. We were at their central location. And right behind me, where I'm looking right now, is this photograph. Or this, sorry, it's not, this is a photograph of the painting. This is the other problem. This is where academia comes from as we practice it today. It was designed by these people, okay? Now, I don't look like those people because, number one, I'm not a man, but most of you out there don't look like them either. It was designed by a bunch of white men in the 1800s to be able to sit around tables and talk to each other about these issues, and it was for each other. The academic community was meant for other academics, and how we design our scientific experiments, how we communicate our science, is in that frame of mind. We communicate to other scientists. We are essentially just a very giant room of these people talking to each other, and that makes it very difficult then when you're dealing with societal problems, because you actually have to involve society, and there's not a single non-scientist, or in fact, in that case, a woman in that audience. So the other thing that I want to bring up, just to go into the rest of the talk, is my own personal experience about this issue, this realization I've had, because this is something that I'm still learning and unlearning, and every day trying to become better at, is how do I get my science to be more embedded in society, and it was really instigated by my own science. As you heard, I'm a chemical ecologist, and I do field research all over the country. This is Sikkim, and I was doing research in this beautiful rhododendron valley. You can see here we're studying pollination at the time, and this was several years ago now, but we came back the next year, and it looked like this. and it was completely plowed over for land development. And I'm an ecologist, and I study flowers and birds, and and I mean, to see this, I sat down in that dirt and I cried, because it was so painful to see something so beautiful get completely destroyed. And I asked the locals, I said, what are you doing this for? They said, oh, they just decided to do it. There wasn't actually any reasoning. There was no logic to why it happened. It was just decided, right? That's one reason. Because I realized that I could just keep going around to my beautiful field sites and watching them disappear one by one, or I could try to do something about this and get more involved in the process. And the second reason is this, okay? We do a number of research in my lab that I had at NCBS. One of them was on air pollution and the effect on pollinators. You see we are on the cover of PNAS. This was about 3 years ago now. And those are just all these articles, news articles about it. It was like all over the news, because it was the first real study on air pollution's effect on wild animals. And so it was a big deal, and it was on lots of newspapers, right? And it also caught the attention of several policymakers. So I started getting these emails like this one coming from the UK, where they're actually talking about UK incinerators, and they used our research and some testimony from us as the basis for discussing how the incinerators should be developed. So it was one of the first times where I saw that my research could have direct applications in policymaking. But it also made me realize something, which is that the postdoc, Geeta, who really did this work for her postdoctoral research, she was insistent that we submit the paper to Nature at first. And I remember the email that I got from Nature. It came back about 3 days later. I'm sure all of you have gotten this email at one point, because it's a form email. And they said, in this case, we don't believe this work represents the sufficient scientific impact such that it might warrant publication. And I'm like, what is scientific impact? What does that mean? Does changing policy not mean impact? Does influencing how people think about pollution not mean impact? What is impact? So I really started thinking, what is going on with our profession as scientists? And I really started to feel that we need to find ways, number one, for society to embrace science and technology, needed to address systemic problems, that they can utilize the science and scientific knowledge to make better decisions. But we also need to train and untrain ourselves to think systemically while addressing systemic issues, and we also have to redefine what it means to be successful as academics for this 21st century, and that's a tall order, okay? And I don't expect that I'm doing this by myself, or even maybe at all, but I'm trying, okay? And I feel that one of the most important things is that we need to do this by building trust. We heard from our previous speaker how important it is to have trust with our communities, trust with each other as well, in order to put the trust in the science and the technology itself. But we also need to make it valuable. It has to be used by people, right? So it has to be valuable to them to use it. And then, of course, ultimately, everyone needs to take responsibility, just like the SIWA work shows, actually only when people take it upon themselves to drive action in their own communities, really will we get sustainability to happen. So how do you get science into communities where they use the science and they engage the science themselves? This is actually the preface and the thesis on which we developed something called the Echo Network, which is what I'm director of now. This is our first picture. This is how big we were when we started. There's Vijay, who at the time was PSA. He initiated this for us. We started as a very high level, top-down sort of structure. We had representatives from several different foundations and companies. We tried to represent academia, NGOs, foundations, industry, and also biotech as well, involved in the beginning of this. And then we decided to start out trying to do an experiment. And this experiment has now grown to over 2,000 members across 45 countries in about 2 years. So that's how fast we've grown. And we're all over the world, mostly in India, of course, because our focus is India. And what we're actually really doing is trying to develop a model, okay? again, I kind of agree, it's not a model that I necessarily think everybody has to plunk down in their own ways, but it's a test, it's an experiment, right? This is how we do it as scientists. And it should look familiar to you. Observe, plan, hypothesize, test, analyze, implement. That should sound familiar. That's the scientific process, okay? This is not rocket science. This is just basic how we do science. The big difference is that we're trying to implement this model with communities themselves. So our laboratories are communities, okay? Our tools are people. Our hypotheses are based on societal problems. So that's the difference in the work we do. And I'm just going to take you through it. I'm also doing this also to get your input, your interests, your thoughts about this process. We're still doing it. We're still trying to perfect it and learn from it and unlearn things. So the first is observe. So we often observe in laboratories or under microscopes. In this model, you observe in the communities themselves. We have gone out and we've had interactions with about 75,000 people. That's very, very little, I know, but it's very hard to do one-on-one interactions like this. And so we've done this through lots of different kinds of events. We've had virtual events, physical events, events through our organizations to get to different urban and rural communities. And we've listened to them, sort of like I did to you earlier, but on a much more intense basis. And then we take all of that information in and analyze it using network analysis, semantic analysis, different analytical techniques to unleash the ideas that are coming from our communities on what's important to them and what they care about and what they're concerned about. And through that process, we actually have generated our 4 focus areas, which have come from these interactions. Because people do care about their health. But what they told us was they weren't just concerned about their own health, they were actually concerned about kind of the health and well-being of the entire community and environment they were. They were concerned about how their health is affected by the water, how their health is affected by the animals and the plants around them. That is really the concept of One Health, and that really became one of our focus areas because that's what people told us was important. Another topic is regenerative agriculture. Now, regenerative agriculture generally means soil and water, but in this case, we also mean the regeneration of livelihoods of farmers, the regeneration of farming as a viable and attractive and worthy livelihood, which is really not seen as right now. So it's really regenerating agriculture as a profession as well as the agricultural practices themselves being regenerative. The next is ecosystem valuation. People basically told us that they were concerned about how we were using the land, but they didn't feel that they had an understanding of the best ways to make those decisions. So how do we make better decisions as a company, as a community, as a government, on how we utilize our ecosystems and our environments? Can they be done in a more systemic and a more science-based fashion? And the final one is circular bioeconomy. So circularity, I think you all know, it's the idea of things coming in, whatever goes in comes out. And the bio part of it means that it's concerned with our natural resources, particularly our biotic resources. How do we utilize biological materials and so that they go back into our environment and they can create the next generation of biomass in order to create more products or processes or technologies. So those are the 4 focus areas, and those came directly from these community interactions and these individual interactions. The next step, of course, is to plan. So just like you do, you plan, you create a scientific experiment. We plan too, but because we're a network, it's not me planning, it's about 500 others, some of which are in the audience. Prashant and Gautam have been participants in our events and our experimentation planning. And we've had over 950 introductions between people. And out of that, because they've been interacting with each other, we always put in the same room, we try to put someone from academia, someone from the service sector, a philanthropic organization, a company. We try to mix and match these different sectors together so that they really start to hear each other and listen and learn these perspectives on these 4 focus areas. Because that has happened, they have themselves branched off and started creating their own initiatives. So throughout this process, we've actually been able to catalyze through these interactions about 8 different national and international initiatives that range from everything from agriculture to nutrition issues to climate to biodiversity. So there's a lot of different variety there, and those came out of these interactions. So then that has helped us to plan and generate what goals, what common goals do our experts from these different sectors feel need to happen in One Health, agriculture, ecosystems, and bioeconomy. And then once we have those goals, then the idea is to start hypothesizing how can we test those goals. And those are being tested through 4 of the initiatives that we've been part of. 3 of them we've been part of developing from scratch, and 1 of them is the Innovation Center that was pre-existing. And these are the test cases that we've decided, right? When you do an experiment, you can't experiment on everything at once. You usually test it on one particular thing and then start to try to replicate that. And so we're doing the same thing, but our testing is in a community. So for the One Health, we're doing a ward in a dengue-free ward in Bengaluru, where an organization has been working with that ward and has their trust. And we've been working with them to understand how they are going to do this in a One Health manner. For agriculture, we're working in some selected dryland communities in Maharashtra, where some of our organizations have a really close connection. And the idea is, how do we create a better strategy for regenerative agriculture, and how do we finance it? So how do we bring in financing mechanisms and policy mechanisms as needed in order to allow this agriculture to be sustainable? And then for the biodiversity, it's actually creating a web resource for valuing ecosystem services that would be available to decision makers. And we're working with the Biodiversity Collaborative, who actually is also working with the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-being. And then finally, creating a toolkit for green textile biocircularity. So our first industry that we've chosen is textiles, because that's a really important industry in India, and it's also one ripe for biocircularity, because there's a lot of options for using biomass in various ways to create new and different types of textiles. So these are our different hypotheses that we're testing right now. And as you can imagine, they have a lot of science. There's a lot of new science that needs to go into this from all different aspects. There needs to be medical sciences, there needs to be technology created, there needs to be economics, there needs to be social sciences. This actually involves a lot of academic inputs, and a lot of really exciting science needs to happen in order to address these questions. So for that, that's where we're doing the training. So we have a program called the Sustainability Ambassadors Global Exchange Program, and it's a 3-level program. It has master's students, PhD fellows, and undergraduates. And these come both from India and also from across the world, from our network institutes from other countries. And it starts with our master's students. So they actually are happening right now. They're, as we speak, I was just talking to them yesterday, and I will be talking to them probably after this talk, doing preliminary research on questions that have come up from our interactions with our experts. And they are working with information from the communities. They're doing stakeholder interviews in many cases, even though they're maybe engineers. They're learning how to do stakeholder interviews, and they're trying to figure out some of the preliminary ideas. And that research will go to our undergraduates who are coming from 2nd and 3rd chair colleges across the country, and they're going to take their research into their home communities. They're being taught communication techniques, learning how to speak in their native language. Majority of it is Hindi, but they do have some other languages as well. And they are going to talk to their communities about this research outputs and try to figure out with their communities what they think about it, what is interesting to them, what their needs are. And those go back into a summit that we're having in just a couple of weeks, and some of our audience members will be at it. Prashant will be at it. And then we're going to actually take that information together and generate projects, longer-term projects, deep dives into this that will be done by our PhD fellows that are starting next year. So that's how we're actually doing this. And all of these, of course, are embedded with community interests and communities in mind. So I just want to give you a sample of kind of research that our master's students are doing. It's just a sample. I won't read all of them out, but as you can kind of see from the titles, they're pretty diverse. A lot of them are reviews and secondary research right now, because we're just trying to get an idea of the space and what's going on. But they will involve then more of the hands-on primary research and development, as well as science and technology development going forward. And these students, as you can see, are also coming from all over the country and actually all over the world as well. And one of the things that was most rewarding to me is starting to get their feedback. And I don't know if this is too small for you, so I'm going to read it out to you, because really that's the most important thing. Are our students understanding what we're trying to do? Are they getting something out of it? And so these are just a sample of the feedback that we've gotten so far. I learned a lot about recent advancements in ongoing research in sustainability industry, specifically about the areas that needed more research. From a community standpoint. And then it was interesting to learn how professionals from different technical backgrounds work together with the same purpose. I believe a main focus was to consider behavioral changes in the whole chain from production to end life of a product to see how individual or community actions can actually make a difference. And then a third one key realization that emerged from the discussions is the interconnectedness of the various areas. This is especially true when it comes to ecosystem valuation, but extends to all, because it became evident that these domains are not mutually exclusive, but rather complement each other in achieving sustainable outcomes. So that was music to our ears, because that means that these students were starting to really understand how the science is actually interconnected, how the work that they're doing, while it might be very specialized, actually connects to a much, much larger problem that's being addressed by many, many other people across the country and across the world. So that brings me to why I'm here. I'm actually here because I want all of you to start thinking about how your research, your work can actually be better embedded into society. I don't mean you to change. You don't necessarily need to start a network, okay? You don't need to suddenly go out into the community right away. But you can start rethinking how you do your work. One is you need to get out of the lab if you're a lab-based researcher. You need to talk to your family, talk to your friends, not about your research necessarily. I'm not talking about science communication. Just talk to them about, what problems they're having, what's going on, what are their concerns. Try to get an understanding of that, and then start thinking about how your work. Maybe you're working on a very specialized aspect, maybe a particular bacteria, maybe you're working on a particular gene or a particular protein. But that leads to something, and that something is also very important to people, and trying to understand your connection with it, and that's how you find out how your puzzle piece fits with others. I think we are so focused on specialization in many cases in our fields, and we're also it's reinforced often by the way we publish and we get grants and we research things that we are taught to be more and more specialized. So we don't really think as much about how our work really connects to other work, especially work that's very different from us. We often write about it. We often say we're interested in cancer, but of course what we're really doing is working on this gene, but really starting to think about that process. How would you take your research out into a community? What would need to happen? What would you need to do? Who would you need to connect with? And connect with those people, right? If a pharmaceutical company needs to learn about what you're doing, talk to a pharmaceutical company. Don't keep it to yourself, right? That's how we actually get our science out there faster, is by having these conversations. And also, it's important to remember that new discoveries can also be just different or better. A lot of the issue we have with sustainability sciences, I don't mean just sustainability science, but all of the sciences around sustainability and technology and innovations therein, are that it's not really necessarily about doing something new, in the sense like we are already wearing clothes. We don't have to learn how to wear clothes. It's that the way we wear clothes and the clothes we wear are not sustainable. So we need to change the way we're doing things. Now, change is not something that we think about in science. We think about discovery. It's always got to be something completely new. But actually what we need to do for sustainability is different. It's a change. It's also new. Different is also new, but it's a different way of thinking. And that becomes really, really important to this. So also when you think about the work you're doing, whether it's in medicine or straight biology or chemistry, thinking about also not only doing something completely new, but how can you rethink something that's already existing and making it better? And that's a very important thing as well. And I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I think I've left enough time for questions. We're at the beginning of this journey. We have a long ways to go, and we are really excited about the things that are happening. We're happy that we have so many people on board. It's actually, I don't really do anything. I just kind of let our network run. It's actually the people in our network. It's the people. We've had 75 people volunteer to teach our students. Just for no money, just because they feel that it's really important to bring their knowledge to these students so that they can expand the knowledge to our communities. So there's a lot of great people out there in this country itself and also across the world who are really doing great things, and it's important to connect with them, to learn from them, and to see how our science can actually help make their lives better. So with that, I will end and say thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the wonderful and insightful presentation. We have a lot to, of course, a long journey to go. But now, after all these discussions, I would invite questions from the audience, discussions, and any suggestions. Please.
A lot. And so I'm going to ask what I think is a little bit of a hard question. But when you look at sustainability science, there's a whole sort of political economy element to that. Not just in terms of sort of the epistemological hierarchies of science that you showed with that picture, but also who's doing the harm, and then who's bearing the brunt of that harm.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, how are you trying to approach or tackle or deal with that in the work that you're doing? That's one. And second, and perhaps relatedly, I was wondering these cohorts or batches of master students and PhD students that you're engaging with, what disciplines are they from?
That's a really hard question. They are from chemical engineering. They are practicing doctors, physicians. They are artists. We have a designer. We have a fashion designer from the National Institute of National Institute of Design. Sorry. We have economists. We have biologists, ecologists. They come from almost every discipline we could find. We didn't target necessarily, we just reached out. We got, 150 something applications, so we had our pick of really some of the best students in the world and in India. And I completely agree, there's so many exciting young people who are just, they want to do this kind of work. So that was the easy part. We just kind of let them go. We have just released them into the world, and they're doing really great work, and they're really working very well with our network members and learning from them on their research. Your first question is a lot harder, and I don't think I can answer it because I don't think if I think we had an answer, I think then a lot of things would be different right now. Those headlines would not be there. The only thing I can say, and this is often the answer I give, I think it's really important to listen. I think that we don't do enough listening. It's one of the things, it's a reason why we're called the echo network. I know a lot of people think we're the eco network because I'm an ecologist, but it's actually the echo network because we feel that we are the reflected voice of society. We're the reflected scientific voice. Because we start by listening, always, even in our conversations. And I think that's what needs to happen. I think a lot of times I hear, coming from my background, I work with a lot of, let's say, conservationists, and they'll say, like, how can you work with this multinational corporation? They're doing all this pollution, they're destroying the planet, they're doing all this. And my answer is, because if we don't, then it's never gonna change. We have to engage in these conversations. We have to listen. And what we have found is actually there's a lot of individuals in these so-called bad, the bad governments and the bad companies and all of these things that we usually blame for problems that actually want to change, but they don't know how because no one's engaging them in these conversations. So I think that's the only answer that I know. I don't know if it's the best answer, but I feel that listening promotes understanding, and it promotes the ability to create commonalities, to find common goals and a common purpose. And look, no matter who you are, you want we want a clean planet. We want people to be healthy, right? There's nobody out there, I don't think, nefarious, twirling their mustache and like wanting to destroy the planet. There might be, but I don't know them, okay? Most of us want a better world. But a lot of times that gets pushed to the side for other things. So you need to find points of commonality and drive those forward. And that's how you can change the conversation to something that is more towards collective sustainability.
Network. I remember very long back when you
were the first conversation we ever had, yeah?
Yeah, I remember when you made the pitch, and I remember being the person also asking all these difficult questions on this. But as I hear and see how the network has evolved, one reflection I wanted to invite from you is, since there is a huge focus on quote-unquote wicked problems, problems that require multiple points of view and a very diverse set of people to go at it. I've also seen multiple such networks which tend to sort of privilege English-speaking academia heavily.
Yeah.
And what I feel that tends to do is, I mean, if you look at the number of government colleges, number of postgraduates out there, there are so many of them who have really amazing insights, but not necessarily in English.
Yeah.
So would the network consider in the coming years trying to have more and more multilingual conversations on these topics? Because that's also, I think, very important, that a lot of these conversations are happening in English.
Yeah. So that's who has ever tried to work with communities understands that, I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. You cannot possibly speak all the languages that you need to understand. And oftentimes it's difficult to translate the language. That's what our undergraduate program is doing. You'll get to meet them in a couple of weeks when you come to the summit. They are actually going to be speaking in their native language, and we're training them on how to deal with these issues in their native language. And they're coming from these second and third level colleges that often don't get a lot of focus, but as you say, are driving really great insights and often are much more connected to communities than our, sort of ivory tower institutes like a lot of us maybe are from, and, so I think that's one way to do it. It also requires a lot of support. We've just been we've been developing our model, so we haven't had the support to be able to drive actually all of the translation and understanding needed, but that is something that we really want to focus on going forward, particularly because now we're actually working really with the communities. It is a very important point. It's something I think about every single day. We don't do it enough. I'm not going to say we're great at it. It's really what our undergraduates are trying to drive through, and we're trying to build that program with the Mission Life as well to get their support. So yeah, but it's a very important point you make, Prashant. Yeah.